child is like a butterfly in the wind. Some can fly higher than others, but each one flies the best it can. Why compare one against the other? Each one is different. Each one is special. Each one is beautiful. A pleasant and blessed morning to everyone. So our topic for today is all about learning resources and instructional accommodation and disadvantaged children. To begin with, allow me first to introduce my group members, starting with Regime Corpus, Jenna May Bral, Angeline Salvador, Jaril Corpus, and yours truly, James De La Cruz. And we are the Group 8. So now, let us know vividly what is learning resources and instructional accommodation to be discussed by Regime Corpus.
When we talk about instructional, it's all about the changes on how you teach your students and also together with the learning resources that you are using on how you deliver your instructions and also kung paano makatch yung attention ng students mo. Teaching them, you can able to develop the abilities of your students and also your instructional materials, it should be clear to your students. And also as a future teacher, you should know how to balance in terms of giving a treatment sa mga students mo, especially yung mga batang may special need. As a teacher, we need to be patient and understand their situations. And we should feel them na hindi kahit na meron silang kapansanan, is kaya nila pa rin gawin yung mga ginagawa ng normal na mga bata. And also, iparamdam natin sa kanila na hindi sila kakaiba para mas maboost pa yung kanilang confidence. Learning resources and instructional accommodations, it is about how you accommodate and manage your students. So, para ma-accommodate natin yung mga students natin may special need, iparamdam natin yung the best na dapat nilang maramdaman as students na may special need. Hindi dapat natin iparamdam na may special needs ka, hindi mo to pwedeng gawin, ganon. Mag-isip tayo ng alternative way na pwede nilang gawin din na hindi nila maramdaman na kakaiba sila. So, yun lang. And the next reporter, Miss Angeline Salvador.
Thank you, Miss Regime. So the next topic that I will be discussing is about accommodation. So what is accommodation? Accommodation is the adaptation or changes in educational environment or practices that help students overcome the barriers presented by their disability. So for instance, accommodation is means of preventing and removing barriers that impede students with disabilities from participating fully in the educational environment in a way that is responsive to their own unique circumstances. Thus, teacher must help their student to overcome their situation in order for them to achieve their goals in life, and giving it full support and encouragements make them feel strong and have courage to face a new life and a new day. And here are the examples of accommodation. There are 4 disability categories. The first is visual disability. Second is specific learning disability. Third is ADHD. And the fourth is orthopedic impairments. So what is the barrier under visual disability? So the barrier is the reading printed text, and the possible accommodation for this are the audio version of text and the large printed materials. And the second one is the specific learning disability. The barrier is decoding text, and the possible accommodations are audiobooks and text-to-speech software. Next is ADH. The barrier of this disability is remaining confused, and the example accommodation for this is allow frequent break. Fourth is the orthopedic impairments, and the barrier for this is writing out responses, and the possible accommodations are permit oral response and speech-to-text software. And the next slide will be discussed by Miss Jaril Corpus.
Thank you, Ms. Salvador. So, accommodations provide the support that allows students without disabilities to achieve the same instructional goals as the students without disabilities. It is important to note that accommodations do not change the expectations for learning, do not reduce the requirements of the task, and do not change what the student is required to learn. Teachers should provide accommodations that meet the unique needs of each individual student. Not all students with the same disability or even those who experience the same barrier will benefit from the same accommodation. Like for example, hindi lahat ng mga estudyante na may visual impairments will benefit from other materials. Some might be better served by audiobooks. Furthermore, it is a common misconception that accommodations offer an unfair advantage to students with disabilities. It allows students with disabilities the opportunity to perform tasks as well as students without disabilities. Next to report is Mr. James De La Cruz.
Again, James De La Cruz, the next reporter. Now, we are going to know what is modifications. Modifications are adaptations that change what students learn and are used with students who require more support or adjustments than accommodations can provide. Whereas accommodation level the playing field, modifications change the playing field. So as you can see on the table in the screen, those are list some modifications that could address the barriers presented by students' disabilities. Note that modifications actually change or modify the expectation or requirements of the task. As you can see in the table, we have 3 columns. The first one is disability category, the second one is barrier, the third one is an example of modification. For disability category, we have visual disability, specific learning disability, ADHD, and orthopedic impairment. So the barrier for visual disability is reading printed text, and example modifications is alternate assignment. And for specific learning disability, the barrier is decoding text, and example is read a lower level book. For ADHD, the barrier is remaining focused. Example modifications is fewer homework questions. And the last one is orthopedic impairment. The barrier is writing out responses, and example modifications is shorter report. So the importance of modification will be discussed by Ms. Regime Corpus.
So, thank you, Mr. James De La Cruz. And now I will discuss the importance of modifications is to know that do change the expectations for learning. There is the changes since the students with disability to the lower level of complexity that tends them to be not be able to grasp the full learning. The whole topic. Unlike the students without disability, we can say that they can able to attain the full grasp of learning. However, as a teacher, we need to understand the difference of our students, especially in their situation, so that we should expect the changes because not all the students in the class do the same level of catching the learning that they needed. And lastly, is though reduce the requirements of the task. As you can see and listen a while ago that James discussed about the example of modification. There is reducing happened between the students and the students with disability. To sum up of what modifications change in materials of procedures that enables students to access instructions and assessment. Modifications do change the construct that is being measured. So, sa pagbibigay natin ng task, kapag sa mga normal students, syempre, kaya nilang gawin kahit ano. But sa mga may disability na students, dapat is iisip tayo ng alternative way na pwede nilang gawin kahit na meron silang kapansanan. From that, hindi nila iisipin na, kakaiba ako sa kanila. From that, hindi na sila maging confident na ako kasi hindi hindi maging hadlang itong kapansanan ko para hindi ko gawin yung task na ibibigay ni ma'am. So, as a teacher, dapat meron tayong alternative way na sa pagbibigay natin ng task sa ating mga students, especially kapag meron silang kapansanan. Para hindi nila iisipin na yung kapansanan nila is hadlang yun sa mga requirements na ibibigay natin sa kanila.
Accommodation and modification, these are terms that get mixed up a lot. In fact, I think many people have different understandings of these terms, and sometimes they throw in the term adaptation as well. We need to make a major distinction between an accommodation and a modification because there are major implications for how they are applied and what they mean for the learner. First of all, an accommodation does not change the content standard or the performance expectation. It could be as simple as putting a grip on a pencil to help a child who may have some writing problems write a little more smoothly. And it could move to very complex kinds of technologies that help students communicate. It is something that offsets the impact of disability without changing the content standard or performance expectation. In contrast, a modification actually changes or alters the content standard or the performance expectation. If a content standard requires that students be able to read a variety of text, narrative text, technical text, critically and make inferences, or requires that students be able to write for different purposes, we could imagine any number of accommodations that could help an individual with a disability meet that standard. But we must never change the idea that the student will read a variety of texts, and typically those texts must be a grade level. That they will be able to demonstrate that they can, and indeed whether they use a pencil, a pen, a word processor, or perhaps a specially adapted word processor, that they can write the required passages and do the required tasks. Now, modification to those same standards might be a student who is only going to read narrative text, and perhaps the text is going to be something that has a controlled vocabulary or in some ways has been simplified because the individual has a significant reading disability. In this example, you have made a modification to performance, but you are still requiring that the child read and the child critique the text and make inferences. Keep in mind that if you pull a child away from the curriculum, if you modify that curriculum, you are also running a very good risk that the child is not learning some important material that is going to be assessed. And if we are really talking about improving learning and improving test scores for students with disabilities, we need to make sure that they are getting access to the right stuff. So moving on to the next topic, which is the disadvantaged children, to be discussed by Jenna May Bural and Jaril Corpus.
Thank you, Mr. James de la Cruz. So let me define first the disadvantaged children. Disadvantaged children are more likely to attend poor quality schools that lack the necessary resources to provide students with adequate education. So, disadvantaged children means children who in their backgrounds are socially or culturally deprived to such a degree that without supplemental facilities and services, they cannot profit in their regular school program to the same extent as children with normal backgrounds. So, who are the disadvantaged students? Disadvantaged students are those who have hindrances to excelling in school because of detrimental circumstances beyond their control. This includes their financial and social hardships as well as problems within students' families.
So, let's proceed to the last topic on how can we identify the disadvantaged students, to be discussed by Miss Jenna May Boral.
So, how can we identify disadvantaged students? First, we have cumulative academic achievement deficits. According to the theory behind cumulative deficit, children who are disadvantaged in enriching cognitive experiences during their early years are less able to benefit from environmental situation due to a mismatch between their cognitive systemic maturity and the beginning of the new, more advanced study situation. These are the instances where they have problems with their cognitive and performance, so they have low academic work and barriers to getting achievements from disadvantaged students. This happened because of the difficulties focusing attention even for little periods of time, incapability to remain motionless for an extended period of time, taking an unusually long time to finish studies such as homework or test writing, and also listening skills are poor and oral instructions are difficult to retain. If your student is struggling with cognitive abilities just because of circumstances that will have a significant influence on his or her academic performances, you need to provide support. Your pupils can learn to fix their problems and achieve higher academic achievement with the help from both home and school. Second, premature school termination and high dropout rate. When compared to their peers without disabilities, youth or children with disabilities are more likely to drop out of school. Dropout rates, on the other hand, vary according to the kind and level of a condition, with youngsters with mental or emotional problems being at the highest risk. Dropout rates for disabled boys and females are comparable in general, and this relationship holds true for students with various forms of disabilities. This appears to be the case for those who have learning disabilities and another form of disability, that they face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that keep them from participating in various aspects of life and adversely affect their health and well-being. Therefore, dropping out is entirely due to the cultural disadvantages, such as poor class and rural background. There are different causes of dropouts, but belonging to a poor economic group makes one more likely to drop out of school. The third one is reading and learning disabilities. Reading difficulty is a subset of a learning disability. Children or students with reading difficulties have normal to above average intellectual ability but struggle to read. These issues have an impact on their academic performance, and the results are far below what is expected for children or students of their age, grade, and intellectual ability. Dyslexia is a type of learning disorder that impacts reading and other language-based cognitive abilities. Some frequent symptoms of a reading disability include difficulty identifying or recognizing sounds associated with letters, distinguishing the sounds inside words, difficulty sounding out words, difficulty rhyming, difficulties understanding and using words and grammar, and poor spelling that results of poor exam scores, poor grades, and missing assignments. So, by emphasizing your students' personal development rather than academic achievements, you will help them develop excellent emotional patterns that will establish the foundation for future success. And the last one is poor language learning. Children with developmental language disorder, or DLD, is a persistent problem with language learning and bear at a higher risk of poor academic and social performance. The children have dyslexia as part of a bigger language acquisition deficit and struggles with both spoken and written language. So you can give opportunities for your students to practice skills taught in individual session. It is priceless to provide information to your student's instructor. Most importantly, provide your student with a rich environment, rich in language experiences, which includes reading with them for fun and assisting them if they are experiencing difficulties. Here ends our presentation. We hope you all learned something from our discussion. Thank you for listening.